In this lesson, we'll learn how we can use the Move tool to transform specific pixel data within our Photoshop files. Okay, great. This is the Lesson 10 Begin file. You'll want to go ahead and open this up if you're following along. So in this lesson, we're actually going to need a file from our Referenced Files folder. So if you want to go ahead and open up this billboard.psd, we'll be using this one as well. So now in the last lesson, we learned about the Move tool and how we can use it to move specific data on individual layers. Now, the Move tool doesn't just move things. We can actually begin to transform them as well. So let's say that for this particular lesson, we want to take this billboard and actually kind of fit it onto this, this photograph of this billboard here. So let's go ahead and jump over to our billboard.psd, and we'll switch to our Move tool. If you're not there already, you can also hit the V key on your keyboard. The way I remember that is that the letter V just sort of looks like this little arrow right here. So V key on your keyboard to get to the Move tool. And I'm simply going to click anywhere on my canvas on this background layer, and we're just going to drag this particular artwork up to the Lesson 10 Begin file, and we'll just come over and drop it right in the middle. Now, immediately you should notice we have a pretty big problem. There's a vast difference in the size of these two files. As a matter of fact, if we were to look at the image size for this document, you can see it is 1700 by 1129, but the image size for our billboard graphic is over 5,000 pixels wide by 1,500 or so. So we've got a pretty large problem here, it being that our billboard artwork is much too large for this document that has the billboard sign in it. Well, we can actually use the Move tool to transform this layer 1 that we now have to fit into our now smaller canvas. So to do that, let's just come up here to our control panel, and we're going to check this little box that says Show Transform Controls. Now you will need to go ahead and zoom out, so hold down that Control and Spacebar with me, and we'll drag to the left. And you can see here we have what is known as a bounding box that has appeared around the billboard artwork. So a bounding box is pretty easy to spot because it has little controls at the corners and on the sides. Now, in the case of this bounding box, we can actually use this to not just transform, whether it's sort of do a free transform and begin to start distorting the artwork, but we can also use this to scale. So if I mouse over one of these corner controls, we'll just go ahead and grab that one. You can see here how I can begin to kind of transform that. But if I want to scale this, let me just hit Escape on my keyboard. That will cancel out of that. So say we want to scale this down. We can hold down the Shift key on our keyboard and then click and drag, and we're going to be able to scale this artwork down. Now, in the case of this particular example, to get it small enough to fit on the canvas, we may actually not want to just hold the Shift key. Let me go ahead and hit this button right here to cancel that. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key and the Alt key at the same time. And that's going to allow me to scale this down from the center of that image. So we can scale that down so that it fits onto our new canvas here. So let's go ahead and zoom in. Now notice here that essentially we still have our transform controls. I haven't committed to this change. I can always use this button right up here to cancel that. But I'm actually not ready to commit or cancel at this point. I want to go ahead and hold down the Shift key, and we're going to kind of size this down a little bit more. All right, now we can still click in the center of that artwork and move it around, even with our transform controls. So now you can see here we need to actually rotate this some. So what we can actually do is mouse over here near the corner and actually begin to rotate the artwork. So maybe we rotate it sort of like that. Now at this point there's a little bit of discrepancy here. We probably are going to need to skew this as well some. So I'm rotating that to kind of fit the top edge, and we can actually scale that down a little bit further if we need to. But you can see here there is actually a little bit of perspective distortion going on here. The top two corners are a little bit tapered in from the bottom two corners. And that's just because of the angle this photograph was taken at. Now, if I were to zoom in on this, and we can actually grab these side controls right here. And if I were to hold down the Control key on my keyboard, we can actually begin to skew our artwork here. So now we're going to learn how to undo at this point. So let's Control Z and undo. I don't want to do that, but I do want to show you that not only can we hold down the Control key and begin to skew, but if I add the Shift key to that, it's going to force me to not basically be able to move my cursor left and right. We're going kind of straight up and down along that axis. So we're skewing kind of evenly here. So let's just kind of skew that guy a little. Now if we wanted to skew the bottom edge, we could again do the same thing. Hold Control and Shift and grab that control right there. And you can see we can kind of begin to skew it just like so. Now when it all boils down to it, we actually probably just need to grab these corners and kind of fit them to the billboard. So if we hold down the Control key and just grab this corner, we can start to kind of position that exactly where we need to. Just like so. All right, fantastic. That graphic now looks like it fits pretty nice and evenly over that billboard, an empty billboard. So again, if we want to commit to this change, we can come up here and hit the check mark inside our control panel, or we can hit the Enter key on our keyboard. And there we go. Now you'll notice that I still see my transform controls here, and that's because we have this box checked. Now, what we just essentially did was we free transformed our artwork. We used the transform controls and we did some free transformations. Now, we can actually come up here to the Edit menu and choose Free Transform, and it's going to bring us into a very similar state. You're going to notice again we have our bounding box here. The control panel looks a little bit different, but basically we have the same control. We can again grab each corner by holding down Control. We can begin to skew if we want to. So the keyboard shortcuts are exactly the same. The difference here is, let me just cancel that out. I was using the Move tool, and we access Free Transform. We also just use this Show Transform controls. Let's say we were using our Eraser tool here. Well, now we don't have that Show Transform controls option, but what we can do is we can access our Free Transform, again by coming to Edit and Free Transform. Or you can use this keyboard shortcut, Control T. And there we go. You can see we can access those same transform controls, or that bounding box, no matter what tool we have selected. We don't necessarily need to switch over to the Move tool. So now I do want to kind of throw an additional monkey wrench at you here, because it's important to understand that by shrinking this artwork down, essentially we downsampled this artwork. By shrinking it down inside this lesson 10 file, we have told Photoshop to take pixels out of the artwork. Now, the last thing you want to do is begin to shrink objects down like this and then try and scale them back up. Because remember, basically what Photoshop is doing when we're resampling is taking pixels out of, in this case, this image, or it's trying to add pixels into it. So at some point, your artwork is going to have a degraded appearance. So in the case of this particular project, we told Photoshop to take quite a few pixels out of this artwork, because if you remember, this is quite a bit larger. Now, I do believe it's important to show you a better way to accomplish this. So if I come back over to my Lesson 10 file, let's just go ahead and hide this layer right here. And what I'm going to show you how to do is bring in this billboard artwork a little bit differently. Now, we just drug it from one document to another, but let's come up here to the File menu and choose the Place option. Now I'm going to browse in my reference files folder to that billboard file, and we're just going to place that in. And you're going to see that it drops it in just like so. Now it's waiting for me to confirm that. So again, we can hit this button right here, or we can hit Enter on our keyboard, but we have now confirmed that. So we've placed this additional artwork in from the billboard file. Now let's look at the Layers panel. There's a layer here that is a little bit different looking. We have a small icon in the corner here. Essentially, what we have done is we have created what's known as a smart object here inside of Photoshop. We could have brought this in by placing it, or we can actually convert a layer to a smart object by simply right-clicking on it and saying Convert to Smart Object. Now, it doesn't do us much good to convert this layer because we've already transformed it and thus downsampled it and lost all those pixels. We could have done this before the fact, but placing this billboard file in does the exact same thing. So what's the benefit of a smart object? Well, a smart object is a special type of layer that retains all of the original source content of the image. So remember, we showed you how high of a resolution this is. Well, this smart object right here is going to retain that information. Makes sense? Let's come over here and grab our Move tool. Now, with the Move tool, at this point, we could again do exactly the same thing that we just did. We can begin to come in here and scale this down. And we can kind of rotate it around and we can fit it to our billboard just like we did a moment ago. But the difference here is we still have this original billboard graphic at its original resolution. Even though we're scaling this down, Photoshop is not sampling this down. It's using a smart object, so we, again, have all of the original pixels still intact. And I'll show that to you just as soon as I get this fitted in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit Enter, and that's close enough. But what I want to show you now that we can do with this smart object is we can come over and double-click on this layer icon, and we're going to get this message from Photoshop. So what this does is it launches a separate document here. You can see it's called billboard1.psd right over here. So what this is doing is it's launching that individual file contained within that smart object. So we have, again, if I come over here and look, all of the original pixel data still intact. So this is probably a better solution, and this is definitely a non-destructive solution to fitting this artwork onto this billboard. Now, moving forward in this course, you're going to hear me talk a lot about non-destructive and non-destructive workflows. So it's important as you're working inside of Photoshop to think of ways that you can do something so that you don't destroy pixels. Because in the case of this original layer, like you saw, once we shrank that down, if we didn't have access to this original file right here, then once those pixels are gone, they're gone. We can't get them back. But the fact that we were able to accomplish the same thing using a smart object allowed us to preserve that original pixel data, and thus this is an example of a non-destructive workflow. All right, great. So again, we'll be talking more about non-destructive workflows as we move forward in this course. But for right now, let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson. In the next lesson, I want to teach you a little bit about how undos and history work here inside of Photoshop.